In all the millennia that the Galactic Confederation had watched the birth and death of civilizations, never once had they witnessed a species that defied every model of intelligent life. They had watched worlds drown in their own wars, watched promising cultures burn themselves to extinction, and watched docile creatures rise to technology only to slip meekly into the fold of the Confederation's enlightened rule. But from the very first observation records, there had been something unsettling about the blue planet the locals called Earth. It was not the level of their technology by all measures. It was crude, fit for a species in the early throes of industrial expansion. Nor was it the curious diversity of their languages or their stubborn cultural divisions. No, what disturbed the Confederation archivists most was the frequency with which humans turned their weapons not upon invaders, but upon each other. Some called it savagery. Others called it the inevitable friction of growth. A handful of cautious strategists had suggested that such relentless conflict might forge something harder than simple violence, a resilience that could become a threat. They were ignored. Now, as the flagship Transcendent Purpose slipped into high orbit, its segmented hull glimmering in the Earth's weak sunlight, High Strategos Veruin studied the latest dossiers and felt an irritation too familiar to name. The Earth species showed potential, yes, but in the end, they were still biological primitives. Their orbital defenses were a tangle of obsolete satellites, half of them defunct. Their electromagnetic emissions suggested an unhealthy fixation on entertainment and pointless conflict simulations. He knew what the other commanders whispered behind their frilled cranial ridges. Humanity was simply another client race waiting to be subdued. Another infant civilization that would weep at the first display of superior power. He was here to prove it. A host of invasion craft, sleek, chitinous constructs that looked almost organic, fanned out from the Transcendent Purpose, each carrying infiltration squads. They would land, incapacitate local leadership with precision psionics, and release the suppression field so that Earth's militaries would lay down their weapons in a stupor. The entire operation was scheduled to take less than a planetary cycle. Veruin took a moment to gaze down at the clouds swirling over the continents. It was always the same: fear, compliance, assimilation. He toggled the observation deck's holodisplays. Countless worlds glimmered as dots of green or red on the tactical overlays, some already integrated, some still resisting in vain. All would eventually bend. Such was the inevitable path of lesser beings. A voice crackled from the comms array. A static-laced signal that should have been nothing more than primitive electromagnetic chatter. "Commander, we are receiving transmissions on multiple channels, Earth origin. Shall I filter them?" "No," Veruin said, more curtly than he intended. "I want to hear their last broadcast before subjugation." He expected pleading, threats, perhaps a bombastic declaration of independence. Instead, what emerged from the speakers was laughter. Low, unbroken laughter. A male voice, speaking in one of the Confederation's ancient trade dialects so fluently that it could not be machine translation. "We know you're listening," the voice said, calm as a tomb. "And we know you think you understand us. But you've never set foot here, have you? You've never smelled the blood in our soil." Veruin stiffened. It was likely some defector or renegade who had intercepted their frequencies. The humans could not possibly know the Confederation's protocol ciphers. "Continue with infiltration," he ordered. Across the Earth, columns of infiltration craft began their descent, shimmering through the stratosphere like falling stars. They spread over the major urban clusters, each programmed to deliver a precise neurological barrage that would erase resistance before it could form. Their flight paths were optimized, calculated to exploit humanity's chaotic communication networks and cripple any coordinated defense. And yet, even as he watched the feeds, something felt off. A pattern in the ground-based sensor arrays caught his attention. In every prior conquest, local populations scrambled in panic, their movements random and desperate. But here, the heat map showed curiously organized flows. Humans were abandoning the obvious choke points and rallying far outside the projected zones of engagement. Units of armed personnel vanished into infrastructure, the invasion algorithms labeled as obsolete Cold War bunkers. Others simply disappeared from all scans, slipping into locations so well shielded they seemed to vanish. Arun studied the data, his irritation souring into a quiet disquiet. "They are prey," he muttered. "They are simply responding to terror with ritual." But he didn't quite believe it. "Commander, should we adjust the target grid?" One of the sensor technicians asked. "No, maintain the plan." He sighed and turned back to the comms panel. That voice still echoed in his mind. "You've never smelled the blood in our soil." The infiltration pods reached their designated altitudes and unfolded in a delicate ballet of mechanical pedals. High above, the suppression field generators came online with a rising whine of harmonic resonance. Soon the humans would all be writhing in neurological agony, every synapse choked by an artificial quiet. That was the way of things. It had always been the way. Except here. As the suppression frequencies began to cascade across the planet, Varun waited for the inevitable. The screaming, the disorganized collapse of every armed force. The glorious silence of victory. Instead, nothing happened. Screens flickered. Bioreadings held steady. Human communications channels erupted with fresh signals, coordinated, encrypted, disciplined. And as Varun watched in dawning confusion, a single phrase blinked across every display. "We see you." Varun's mandibles clicked together with a sharp snap, the only outward sign of his mounting unease. Around him, the bridge crew shifted in, their cocoons, exchanging glances heavy with silent alarm. The suppression fields were as powerful as any ever deployed. They had pacified entire planetary populations in less than an hour. Yet Earth's biosphere remained obstinately alive, vibrant, untouched by the Confederation's most refined tools of subjugation. He cycled the displays again, convinced there must be some calibration fault, a misalignment of the projectors, or a harmonic interference from the ionosphere. But the telemetry was unambiguous. Human soldiers were not writhing in agony. They were moving methodically, with purpose. "Rerun the resonance metrics," he ordered, his voice pitched lower. "Verify suppression amplitude." The technicians. Celia trembled as she obeyed. Verified strategos. No fault in the array. Varun's second heart gave a dull, uncomfortable thump. He tried to smother the feeling, but it wormed through him anyway. Something here was not only unpredictable, it was fundamentally wrong. He turned again to the Earth feeds. Infantry formations that should have been decimated by neural feedback were forming up in a wide arc south of a city the archives labeled Chicago. Others were establishing perimeters along the mountain passes and river choke points. "They are not breaking," the sensor officer whispered, though he knew he should not say it aloud. "They are organizing." "Impossible," Varun snapped. "Their nervous systems are inefficient, overly complex. They cannot." He broke off. His gaze had fixed on a live broadcast, captured from an Earth satellite the infiltration teams had failed to suppress. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. A column of armored vehicles advancing down a shattered highway, each hull painted in matte camouflage, each turret tracking the sky. In the lead vehicle, a human officer leaned from the hatch, holding the crude radio transceiver. He was smiling. The voice crackled again through the ship's internal speakers. "Test complete," it said in that same eerily calm tone. "We wanted to see if you'd show your hand early. You did. That was a mistake." A murmur rippled across the bridge. No prey species spoke like that, not to the Confederation. Not with such contempt. Varun felt the chill again, as if some hidden predator were breathing on the back of his neck. Below, the infiltration pods completed their landings. Hatches unfolded like alien blossoms, and dozens of psionic infantry disembarked, armored in living carapace. They fanned out into the night, their minds linked in perfect telepathic formation, weapons pulsing with lethal charge. All according to plan. This was the moment when local defenders usually cowered and surrendered, when any last semblance of defiance crumbled. Yet the visuals told another story. In several insertion zones, humans were already waiting. Not in the confused, frantic clusters Varun expected. They had established defensive berms, heavy machine guns bristling behind. Sandbag fortifications. In infrared, he could see the thermal signatures of hundreds, no, thousands of human soldiers positioned in disciplined lines, their hearts steady, their movements precise. A Confederation tactical overseer, an old strategist whose name had been etched in the archives of many subjugated worlds, hissed softly. They should be in disarray, she said. Even if immune to suppression, they should be demoralized by the show of force. But they were not. If anything, the presence of the Confederation troops seemed to galvanize them, like wolves scenting the blood of intruders in their territory. Varun clenched one hand around the railing of the observation platform. They are bluffing. They cannot possibly. His denial was interrupted by a new telemetry burst from a forward recon unit. The image froze on the main view screen, displaying a field strewn with debris, not human bodies, but shattered suppression beacons and burning infiltration pods. Humans had set traps, simple radio lures, and high-yield explosives, hidden under the guise of abandoned vehicles. The Confederation troops never saw them until the charges detonated. A stunned silence swallowed the bridge. New contact reports. The sensor officer rasped. Multiple ground-to-orbit transmissions detected. Encrypted in unfamiliar protocols. Their source is not civilian infrastructure. Varun turned slowly, unable to mask the tremor in his limbs. Then where? The officer's compound eyes blinked in confusion. Subterranean, deep facilities we have no record of. Another technician added, long-range comms array signatures. They're coordinating on a global scale. Varun's mind raced. He had studied hundreds of emergent civilization species that believed their clever tricks could stave off inevitable conquest. But none had ever possessed this degree of strategic patience. The humans had allowed the Confederation to believe their illusions of superiority, let them land in carefully chosen kill zones, and only now began to reveal their true preparations. A tactical officer murmured, "Strategos. This does not align with predictive models." No, it did not. Varun found himself remembering something he had read in a footnote. Long ago, a commentary on the peculiar psychology of Homo sapiens. An archivist had written, when threatened, they do not flee in panic. They become calm. They become precise. They plan for vengeance. He had thought it academic speculation. He knew now that he had been wrong. The voice returned, one last time, almost amused. You think you came here to bring order. But you never asked yourselves what kind of world survives its own chaos. You think we are prey. You don't understand. The transmission cut. Across the bridge, the crew waited, staring at their commander. Varun said nothing. His gaze drifted back to Earth, to the flickering lines of coordinated human resistance spreading like a contagion. As he watched, he realized this was no spontaneous uprising. This was a plan, generations in the making. And in that instant he felt the first icy pang of doubt. Not that humanity could be conquered, but that the Confederation had ever truly known what it was dealing with. Asterisk aboard the transcendent purpose. The hush that followed the last human transmission felt as heavy as deep ocean pressure. No one spoke. The confidence that had buoyed every conquest before this was gone, replaced by a crawling unease none dared to voice aloud. Varun's gaze traced the thin blue horizon of Earth. He could not admit it even to himself, but the shape of this campaign had become grotesquely inverted. The humans were not merely resisting. They were anticipating. They had been waiting for this invasion. Below, the infiltration teams pressed deeper into urban sprawl, their carapace armor bristling with psionic resonance. They advanced in perfect telepathic silence, convinced, as their training insisted, that no primitive species could counter such mental domination. And yet, in the shadowed ruins of a derelict industrial district, the first shock came. Squad Alpha 3 breached a warehouse complex, sensors sweeping for any trace of human presence. A corporal advanced 3 paces over a cracked concrete floor and froze. His armor's biosensors went dark. The squad leader gestured for caution and moved to assist, extending a slender manipulator to assess the soldier's vitals. Before she could react, the corporal's head snapped up and a searing electromagnetic pulse erupted from a device clamped to his carapace. The squad's comms flared with static, and then died. It was not a human ambush. It was worse, an adaptation. When the recovery drones arrived minutes later, the squad was gone, their armor split open with precise cutting charges. Human footprints led away into the darkness, but no further traces could be found. Varuan's mind was still struggling to process this report when another came in from the North American theater. A Confederation assault column, attempting to encircle a city center, found itself funneled along a highway the humans had kept suspiciously intact. Satellite reconnaissance showed no heavy emplacements, so the commanders advanced confidently. That was when the confidently ground itself exploded. Tons of reinforced concrete and steel peeled upward in a geyser of flame. Dozens of armored vehicles vanished into a roaring vortex of heat and shockwave. In the aftermath, a scorched chasm more than a kilometer long yawned where the highway had been. Varuan's throat was dry. The Confederation's own records described humanity's fixation on total war, but seeing it unfold in real time was something else. Strategos, the tactical overseer, ventured carefully. It appears they seeded their infrastructure with demolition systems decades ago. That would have met a civilization whose civilian engineering and military preparation were blurred together by default. No single regime, no temporary surge of panic. This was cultural, systemic. We have underestimated the depth of their strategic reserves, Varuan said, his voice deliberately steady. Their capabilities are still finite. They cannot withstand orbital strikes. He gestured to the comms officer. Target their largest visible formations, fire. The main batteries of the Transcendent Purpose powered up, each a lance of coherent energy designed to erase enemy positions from orbit. But before the weapons could discharge, a new alarm screamed across the command deck. "Commander!" cried the sensor technician, her spined crest fully erect in fear. "We are detecting return fire." Varuan turned so quickly his cervical vertebrae cracked. "Impossible. They have no orbital." The displays erupted in a blizzard of data, a swarm of launch signatures climbing into the upper atmosphere. They were coming from hardened silos the Confederation had dismissed as obsolete relics, rusting Cold War bunkers left to decay. Yet the missiles were real, and they were locked on. A schematic blinked into focus. Dozens of hypersonic projectiles, each tipped with a variable payload. Most were conventional, but some glowed with the unmistakable signature of kinetic impactors. Rods of tungsten accelerated to orbital velocity. Varuan opened a secure channel to the fleet escort squadrons. Intercept those warheads before they breach the exosphere. The escorts maneuvered with inhuman grace, their point defense arrays spitting clouds of interceptor drones. The first wave of human missiles was cut down in a storm of autonomous counterfire, but the second wave came on the heels of the first, faster, lower, more agile. In a single synchronized volley, dozens of kinetic rods streaked through the upper atmosphere and struck the Transcendent Purpose across her dorsal hull. The entire command deck lurched sideways. A shower of sparks erupted from overloaded power conduits. Alarms wailed as the ship's inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. Varun's vision blurred. The bridge was plunged into half-darkness, emergency biolights casting everything in stark crimson. "Report," he snarled. "Ho!" "Breaches on decks 12 through 19, an officer croaked. "Port batteries offline. Atmospheric containment failing in multiple sections." Another officer whispered, aghast. They knew where to hit us. On the main tactical display, the schematic of Earth pulsed with fresh signals. Human anti-orbital. Batteries were coming online hidden in mountains, buried in deep underground vaults, disguised as geological survey stations. One by one, they emerged from hiding, as though the planet itself had decided to bare its teeth. Varun's mandibles parted in a slow exhalation. "This was never a spontaneous defense," he said, the words tasting of dread. "This was an ambush. Decades, perhaps centuries in the making." The tactical overseer's voice was thin and hollow. "They have studied us. They knew our operational doctrine." And in that moment, Varun understood the reason no other species had prepared like this. Because no other species could. It was not just that humanity was violent. It was that their entire history had trained them to expect extinction and to meet it with cold, premeditated fury. As damage control teams scrambled to seal the hull, a final telemetry burst flickered onto the bridge screens. It was a simple message, broadcast from Earth's surface, translated perfectly into Confederation glyphs. "You have mistaken our patience for weakness. This was your first mistake." The transcendent purpose limped through low orbit like a wounded leviathan, hull fissures bleeding atmosphere in luminous trails. Emergency partitions sealed off compromised compartments as damage. Control drones swarmed across ruptured bulkheads. Varun gripped the command dais to steady himself. A part of his mind, a disciplined, clinical fragment that had risen through the Stratigo's ranks, kept whispering that this should be impossible. No species had ever forced a Confederation dreadnought to retreat under fire from the ground. Yet, here he was, orbit decaying by the minute, and Earth still bristling with defiance. He forced composure into his voice. "Deploy additional infiltration divisions planet-wide. We must cripple their launch sites before they bring more anti-orbital platforms online." "Confirmed," replied the tactical overseer, though her mandibles hung limp, betraying her disbelief. The bridge screens flickered with fresh telemetry. Pods hurtled into the atmosphere in tight spearhead formations, trailing plasma wakes. Each carried elite psionic vanguards, bred to quell rebellion by shredding the minds of defiant primitives. Varun watched them descend and told himself this time, the humans would break. But the humans were already moving. In the darkness below, spotters tracked the pod's descent angles and relayed targeting data to artillery batteries hidden in abandoned towns. As each pod broke atmosphere, an unassuming truck or half-buried shipping container would blossom open, revealing massive self-propelled guns. Thunder cracked across fields and city outskirts as shells lanced upward. In midair, the pods began to fail, some torn open by direct hits, others crippled by shrapnel that smashed control vanes or ruptured anti-gravity compensators. Of the 80 pods launched in the first wave, fewer than half reached the ground intact, and those that survived the barrage emerged to find not terrified civilians, but organized kill teams. It began near the ruins of an old industrial port. A Confederation vanguard squad, their minds joined in perfect telepathic union, advanced. Between twisted shipping cranes, they moved with serene confidence, weapons humming with barely contained psionic charge. One by one, though, their heads tilted in confusion. Static. The psionic link began to fray, crackling with interference. Commands turned to gibberish. Shapes moved between the broken containers, figures clad in rugged environmental armor, carrying weapons that glimmered with unidentifiable emitter arrays. The squad leader tried to focus, to reassert dominance over the inferior human minds, and the world shattered in a burst of white agony. Human. Counter-PS, IONICSWVRU1 saw the feed cut abruptly, the squad's biotelemetry flatlining. The humans hadn't just prepared for an invasion of flesh and steel, they had prepared for an invasion of thought. Strategos, rasped the overseer, voice ragged with incredulity. Our units are reporting psionic nullification fields in at least 6 engagement zones. Varun felt something crack inside him. That technology is forbidden under Confederation law. They must have derived it themselves, the overseer whispered, staring down at her sensor readouts. They must have known this was coming. More alerts erupted. Confederation. Forward operating bases, hastily erected on presumed safe landing sites, were under coordinated assault. A swarm of small rapid response teams struck again and again in surgically precise raids. The attackers never stayed to be pinned down. They struck ammunition depots, sensor relays, communications hubs. They were not fighting like prey. They were fighting like something far older, something that understood predation as well as any Confederation strategist. Varun looked across the smoldering battle map. He could see the pattern now, the dreadful intelligence behind it. The humans were systematically severing his ability to control the BATTL ESPA. Another voice called out communications this time. Strategos, new wideband transmission. Addressed directly to Confederation command. Put it through, Varun croaked. The main screen shimmered. An image resolved. A human female, clad in a simple combat uniform, her expression calm to the point of being clinical. A flag patch adorned her shoulder, blue fields and white stars. Her voice was measured, precise. To the leadership of the Confederation, your occupation force is compromised. Your orbital advantage is temporary. Your assumptions are obsolete. Varun's mandibles clenched. You are accustomed to waging war against species you deem unprepared, she continued. But your intelligence apparatus failed to comprehend a simple truth. Earth breeds predators, not prey. Her eyes met. The camera, flat and steady. We have spent centuries preparing for annihilation. You merely arrived to play your part. The transmission winked out. Asterisk in the silence that followed. Varun's second heart began to pound in a sick, arrhythmic cadence that he could not deny it any longer. The humans had built entire infrastructures, military, industrial, cognitive, to repel exactly this kind of incursion. They had studied Confederation doctrine as a zoologist studies the hunting habits of a dangerous animal, and now the Confederation itself was cornered. Strategos, came another voice, tentative, as if afraid to speak. Should we consider disengagement? Varun did not answer immediately. Part of him wanted to believe retreat was still an option, that they could regroup, reassert control. But even as he opened his mouth, a final burst of telemetry lit the command deck. Human aerospace squadrons, previously hidden in underground vaults, were launching in waves. Their craft were ugly, outdated by Confederation standards, yet they flew in disciplined formations and carried warheads that could cripple even a dreadnought. In the wrong place, the first impact tremored through the hull, a dull, hammering concussion. Sparks cascaded in the half-darkness. Varun realized, with bleak clarity, that this was no longer an occupation. It was a fight for survival. Asterisk, the hull of the Transcendent Purpose shook again, as though the planet itself was reaching up to tear. The dreadnought from the sky. Shattered plating drifted into orbit like metallic snow. Varun's spines lay flat along his neck, a visceral display of fear he could not suppress. All across the command deck, the crew wore the same expression, shocked, disbelieving horror that a supposedly primitive world could wound them so deeply. He tried to rally his voice. Reconfigure point defenses to prioritize atmospheric threats. Rotate the bombardment batteries. If we must scour their launch sites to molten rock, so be it. The tactical overseer was pale, her crest trembling. Strategos. Multiple weapon batteries are offline, and our stabilizers are degrading. Even our targeting solutions. I don't care, Varun hissed, mandibles flaring. Reroute auxiliary power. Do something. But even as the overseer obeyed, another signal flickered. On the central display, a new contact small, fast, ascending from the western hemisphere. It was no crude missile. Its drive signature was precise, impossibly controlled. Varun squinted, dread pooling in his gut. Identify, the sensors struggled. Unknown configuration. The tech rasped. The hull alloy is unlike any human record we possess. It's not theirs. And then the realization hit him with the force of a kinetic strike. The humans had an ally. Show me, he croaked, the projection magnified. A single blade-shaped craft, armored in black composites that shimmered with adaptive camouflage. Its power signature was too dense, too refined. Impossible, whispered the overseer. This world is isolated, no other species would, but Varun already understood. These were not off-worlders. They were human, some remnant of a lost project, some hidden development effort buried under disinformation and deniable funding. A final contingency to be unleashed only if the planet faced true extinction. The new vessel broke atmosphere like a spear hurled by a vengeful god. Plasma sheathed its hull as it climbed straight into low orbit. Then it spoke. Confederation vessel. This is Archangel Actual. The voice was male, resonant with the authority of someone who had been training for this singular moment his entire life. You will vacate Earth's orbit or be destroyed. Varun's heart thudded painfully against his ribs. Weapons. Lock on that target, he ordered. But before the order could be confirmed, the Archangel moved. A beam of coherent light, narrow, invisible to most spectrums, lanced from the blade-shaped prow. For an instant, nothing appeared to happen. Then a dorsal turret assembly on the transcendent purpose came apart in a silent eruption of superheated metal. The command deck fell silent. Varun's mind raced in horror. This was no prototype. This was a fully operational strike craft built to engage capital ships alone. And it wasn't alone. Telemetry began streaming in. More launch signatures, 7:15. 20. Hidden bunkers around the globe, disgorged black armored interceptors, each with drive emissions that dwarfed anything in human archives. These were the real weapons, the secret arsenal the Confederation had never dreamed Earth possessed. On the main display, Archangel Actual's voice returned. You came here believing you were predators. You came to conquer a world you did not understand. The tactical overseer whispered, Strategos, our escorts. Her voice cracked. They're already under attack. Varun turned toward the external viewports. Beyond the glass, tiny glimmers danced in the dark, archangels weaving between the Confederation's perimeter ships. Where they struck, frigates and destroyers folded in on themselves, their hulls sheared open by pinpoint lances of energy. Every tactic, every contingency he had studied over a lifetime was failing him. How did they hide these? He demanded. No one answered, no one could. He stared at the main display as the Archangel's voice continued, implacable. This world has known the threat of annihilation since it first split the atom. We learned to survive in the shadow of extinction. You see only chaos and violence, but you never saw the unity forged by the certainty of our end. He could feel the words driving into the marrow of his bones. Leave, while you can. Because this is not a war you will win. This is a hunt, and you are the prey. Static swallowed the transmission. Varun's spines twitched. Even the Confederation's most hardened tacticians had never contemplated such a scenario. A civilization capable of industrial-level war, willing to fight to the last, yet possessing hidden technologies that could match an empire's greatest fleet. Strategos, the overseer rasped, voice as brittle as old glass. Our losses are mounting. The archangels are disabling our escorts faster than we can respond. We. Her words died as the deck shuddered under another impact. A pressure. Alarm began to wail. Varun lifted his head. His vision tunneled on the tactical readouts. If he retreated now, he might save the fleet. But if he stayed, he risked total annihilation at the hands of these apex predators in human guise. No wonder Earth bred them. No wonder no invader had ever truly conquered them. Because in humanity's ancient bones was the oldest lesson of all. When cornered, a predator doesn't flee. It strikes. And the Confederation, so smug, so certain, had never learned that truth until now. On the shattered bridge of the transcendent purpose, klaxons screamed in a descending wail as system after system flickered offline. A pall of smoke drifted across cracked consoles, blurring the panicked shapes of crew clinging to their stations. Varun stood motionless at the command dais. For the first time in his long career, he could not hear the disciplined voices of his officers coordinating a defense. He heard only ragged breathing like the gasps of drowning creatures and the dull, thundering concussions of war. In low orbit, the battle was no longer a contest. The archangels did not swarm like insects, nor did they posture in a ponderous blockade. They hunted silent, methodical, pitiless. One by one, Confederation destroyers burst apart as if gutted by an invisible blade. Lances of coherent energy bored through armor, detonating magazines before damage control systems could react. The humans were not content to drive them back. They were systematically erasing every vessel that dared linger over their world. Varun's tactical display stuttered and reloaded. Each time, fewer green icons remained. His comms officer finally managed to choke out a report. Strategos. The serene doctrine has been destroyed. The invincible grace is adrift, life support failing. A burst of static overrode her voice. This is Archangel Actual. Your flagship is targeted. Disengage your weapons and prepare to evacuate orbit. This is your final warning. Every instinct screamed at Varun to fight, to fire every remaining torpedo, and burn this defiant world to cinders. But he could no longer deny what he saw. These were not acts of desperation. They were acts of domination. Another impact slammed the dreadnought's flank. Consoles shattered in a rain of glass and sparks. The viewports polarized to block the blinding glare of an energy lance carving along the ship's dorsal spine. Strategos. Our forward batteries are gone. Point defenses failing. Core integrity at 23%. The bridge was dissolving into chaos. And then the final strike came. Through the viewport, Varun glimpsed it. A single archangel, gliding so close he could almost see its armored prow. For an instant, it hung there in silence. A black dagger poised above the heart of his ship. A lance of light stabbed forward. The viewport darkened completely. The impact struck the dreadnought like a sledgehammer. The deck tilted under his feet. His spine smashed against the dais. When the view returned, a long scar had been burned through the outer hull, venting fire and frozen air into the darkness. A lesser species would have broken then, would have broadcast surrender, would have pleaded, but even surrounded, bleeding from 1,000 wounds, the dreadnought retained the arrogance of the Confederation. Varun clenched his mandibles, tasting iron. All remaining squadrons launch. Ram them if you must. This is our last chance. He never finished the order, because the humans came, not just the archangels, but the surface-launched aerospace fighters. Dozens of them, their contrails spiraling like the talons of some vast predator. They closed on the dreadnought in coordinated wedges, every vector carefully calculated. A voice broke across the tactical band, carried by a calm human transmission. All wings, final approach. Confirm targeting locks. Execute. The dreadnought's forward hull erupted under a hurricane of kinetic penetrators. Guided munitions, dumb projectiles, and slashing beams converged. In the span of 10 heartbeats, 1,000 tons of composite armor failed. The once proud flagship began to list, its engines stuttering, fires cascading through its spine. Varun looked into the smoke billowing from the overhead vents. He realized that even now, he had misunderstood them. He had believed the archangels were humanity's final weapon. But in truth, humanity itself was the weapon. No single system or prototype was their salvation. It was the minds that had built them, their relentless refusal to kneel to extinction. Another burst of fire tore across the bridge. Consoles died. The tactical display winked out for the final time. Outside, the dreadnought's armored prow glowed red-hot as atmospheric drag claimed it. The last surviving Confederation ships were retreating, hounded by Archangel squadrons that did not relent. Even as they passed the edge of Earth's gravity well, Varun's heart thumped rhythmically. For a moment, he thought he would simply collapse to the deck and fade into darkness. But then he staggered to what remained of the VIEWPOR to dot below. Earth turned serenely in the blue-black void, scarred, but unbroken. A voice crackled over a private channel, impossibly clear amid the chaos. Strategos via RU1 dot. It was Archangel Actual again. Your empire believed it could erase us. You failed. The black ship drifted closer, its lances flickering with restrained energy. When your kind speaks of this day, remember the truth. It is not our weapons you should fear. It is our will. Varu pressed a trembling hand to the viewport glass. He thought of all the worlds the Confederation had, subjugated civilizations that had bent under the weight of dreadnoughts, and psionic conquerors. Earth alone had stood up and bitten back. In the void, the Archangel's engines flared. The shape dwindled as it turned away to hunt other survivors. And in that instant, when the flagship began to tumble from orbit, her hull disintegrating in a trail of incandescent debris, Strategos Varun finally understood what it meant to face a predator more ancient and determined than any species his people had ever encountered. Earth had survived everything it had ever faced, and it would survive them too. The wreckage of the transcendent purpose became a falling star, its scorched hull breaking apart as it plunged through the atmosphere. In the sky above Eurasia, millions looked up and watched it burn, a silent, incandescent testament to the day Earth refused to kneel. Across every continent, cities emerged from their bunkers. Sirens that had howled for days finally fell quiet. Soldiers in exoskeletons and orbital control officers stumbled into the daylight, blinking, dazed but alive. On the plains of Central Asia, where the first Archangel had launched, Commander Aaron Rourke stood in the scorched grass beside his command vehicle. His face was streaked with soot and sweat, his voice raw from hours of issuing orders. Around him, screens flickered with live feeds, images of burning Confederation ships, trailing fire as they crashed into the oceans or broke apart in low orbit. Radio chatter poured in, status reports from Archangel squadrons confirming the final mop-up operations. 12 more enemy vessels eliminated. Remaining contacts retreating past lunar orbit. Allied ground batteries standing by. No further launches detected. Copy. Repeating. Earth command to all units, cease fire. Secure wreckage. Evacuees returning to shelters. Rourke listened without speaking. He could hardly comprehend that it was over, not just repelled but won. A crew member handed him a hard copy tablet, displaying the final casualty estimates. Though hundreds of thousands were dead in the first strikes, it was nothing like the extinction the Confederation had promised. Somewhere behind him, the Archangel pilots were disembarking, their black flight suits still radiating the cold of high orbit. One by one, they pulled off their helmets, revealing tired, unsmiling faces. Not a single one looked triumphant, because this was never about glory. It was survival. A medic approached Rourke, gesturing to the cuts on his forehead. He waved her off gently. His eyes stayed on the sky, where the last embers of the flagship's fall drifted in the stratosphere. From the smoldering perimeter of the command site, A column of dust rose as an armored transport rumbled closer. The vehicle's hatch opened. With a hiss, and a woman in a tattered uniform climbed out, her hair plastered to her temples with sweat. "Rourke," she rasped. He turned. Director Sloan. Her gaze swept the battlefield, taking in the scorched launch pads and scattered wreckage of kinetic interceptors. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she drew a long breath. "It's done?" He nodded. "They won't be back," he said softly. Her voice cracked with something that sounded almost like relief. "God help them if they ever try." Together, they watched the dawn rising over the mountains. All across the world, a fragile quiet was spreading like the hush after a storm. The Confederation had come expecting to teach humanity its place, but they had learned the most ancient lesson of all. Earth was not a world of prey, it was a world that had evolved under constant threat of extinction, of its own worst impulses, of cosmic indifference. It had survived ice ages, pandemics, nuclear brinkmanship, and centuries of war. And in the end, that crucible had forged something the Confederation's sterile empire could never create. A species that would never yield. Far above, in the Confederation, fleets fractured remains, the survivors limped toward the edge of the system. On the bridge of the crippled cruiser Resolute Accord, a single surviving strategist, the Linus of the 10th Doctrine, watched the tactical displays. She recorded the last telemetry of the flagship's destruction and the loss of the dreadnought escorts. She archived it all in a sealed file marked Directive, Never Engage Soul, and as her hands trembled over the controls, she felt the truth settle into her marrow. For all their centuries of conquest, they had never faced an enemy like this. In the darkness of space, she spoke to no one in particular. They were never prey, she whispered. They were always predators waiting for something worth killing. Then she closed the record and began the long process of retreat. On Earth, the first civilian broadcasts returned. Emergency networks switched to public channels, repeating messages of survival in a dozen languages. We endured. We are still here. In the halls of the underground command centers, officers gathered around flickering displays. They read casualty lists, tallied losses, and inventoried the Archangel's spent arsenals. But amid the ruin and exhaustion, there was no despair, because the most critical truth had been proven beyond argument. Humanity could not be broken by force. When night fell again, the sky was clear except for the pinpricks of satellite debris. All along the Pacific coastlines, crowds gathered to watch the stars reappear, each one a reminder that Earth was no longer alone, but it was no longer defenseless either. And in every surviving city, children would grow up hearing the story, how the sky was black with ships, how the oceans burned, how the world itself seemed about to die. And how humanity looked into the face of annihilation and said, no. In a dim conference room beneath Geneva, Rourke finally sat down, feeling the weariness settling into his bones. He reached for the last mission report and scrawled the words that would become legend. Why Earth breeds predators, not prey. He closed the file, knowing it would be studied in every corner of the galaxy, by every species that ever dreamed of conquest. Because this day would stand forever as proof that when the universe came to devour Earth, it had found something older and more ferocious than any empire. It had found humanity, and it had learned to be afraid.